Hello, everyone. Welcome to another evening of NAMI Sharing Hope Community Conversations. This is our monthly conversation where we get together and we just talk about different life things and life topics that are happening around the world and to us individually as a community. And we have different guests who come on to share their expertise, but we also make sure that there is space and room for everyone who joins to have conversations, share their thoughts and things like that as well. It is November, the end of the year, which we all know can be a hectic time with lots of highs and lows. So this evening, we're going to be talking about anxiety and grief through the holidays. There is resources we're putting in the chat as well. There's the Delaware Crisis Doc, which has resources available to you. I am Nyemade. I am a volunteer with NAMI. I am not a trained professional. I just help to facilitate these conversations, but we do try to have some professionals on as well to give us advice and tips as well as other advocates. So I'm really excited about the people joining us today. First, I'm going to have everyone just introduce themselves and tell you all a little bit about them. And first, I'll go with Dr. Dooley.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So again, I'm Dr. Leigh Ann Dooley. I'm a board certified psychiatrist practicing in Georgia. And currently my practice is outpatient. I work for the Veterans Administration. And it really is my kind of passion to kind of destigmatize mental health, particularly in Black and Brown communities. And so just thank you all for having me this evening.
Thank you so much for joining. And Sasha?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sasha Nicole. I am a mental health advocate. I have a brand that's dedicated to enrich the lives of others with mental wellness, happiness, and confidence, as well as a nonprofit dedicated to women who are suffering from postpartum depression.
Thank you. And Alyssia.
Hello, my name is Alyssia Cruz. I'm a clinical social worker, therapist based out of California. So I do telehealth, especially nowadays. And really, I just enjoy, like my favorite clients are the anxious folks. So I think definitely talking about the anxiety through the holiday season, the grief that goes along with that, you know, is really important to me just because it can be really isolating and lonely for our community, especially, you know, when there is a lot of stigma about talking about our mental health. So also really grateful to be here.
Thank you so much. And I apologize for saying your name incorrectly, Alyssia and Sasha Nicole. I got this. Names with me are tricky sometimes, but we'll stick in this together.
It's all good.
Thank you all for joining. Yeah, so the thing with the holidays is they're on one level, they're wonderful, right? You get to see your family, you get to see your friends. It's all, you know, kumbaya. But at the same time, I mean, I know I go through a lot of anxiety about going home to see my family. And I'm not really sure why, because we're close. Like I love my family, we're tight, but I still feel that sense of anxiousness. So actually, since you said you love your anxious clients, what do you think some of that stems from? And what are some ways that you try to help them work through that?
Well, I think some of it can be a little bit of guilt, right? Because we're always told that the holidays, it's the happiest time of the year, right? So sometimes when we aren't happy, when maybe we're depressed or we're super anxious, and then we're going to see family and they kind of expect us to perform, right? Like maybe they haven't seen you in a couple weeks, a couple years, a couple months, and they expect you to be happy and come and participate. And, you know, you show up to the family function, come and say hi to everybody. And if you're not used to that in your life anymore, I really do think there is this almost performance anxiety. Like you have to show up and, you know, just interact with everybody. And it's a lot of emotional energy, you know, especially nowadays, we're all spread very thin. And it's also weird going home, you know, going back to where maybe your family is going to treat you like they did when you were 12. And if you feel like you've moved on from that, I think it's almost re-triggering in a way to just be back in it. And, you know, especially if it's the same family home or the same cousin that used to always tease you and things like that. So it's almost like having to relive some things that maybe at the time weren't painful, but when you come back, it's like bringing it all back to the surface.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, those are some really great points because I know for me, especially as someone who moved away from home,
Mhm.
it was this weird thing when I would go back home, I realized that I had sort of like stopped time with everyone. Like I thought that I'd come back and they'd all be like exactly as they were, and they weren't, because while I was growing and changing, they were growing and changing. And it's hard. And even like now when I go back, I realize sometimes, especially with parents, you know, they see you as you were, even though you're like this whole new person, or not, but at least you have some of the differences, that you've grown and changed a little bit. Sasha Nicole, for those who might be going home and experiencing anxiety, like what are some things and tips that you maybe say to yourself to work through those moments when you're feeling anxious about going home or about attending a family function?
So I think, like for me, going back home, I think about the questions that I might get asked. And so I try to prepare myself in terms of, what are some things that they may ask. And sometimes, those personal questions, or especially for those people who are single, or the kid question or the marriage question and those type of things. So for me, it's just about preparation. It's just about making sure that I breathe, and then being okay with, if I'm ready to go, leaving, and not feeling apologetic about that.
Mm. Yeah, that is a huge one, being like, I'm out. Because it's hard because you feel like you should have to stay. Dr. Julie, what are some tips for working through the anxiety? Like, some tools that you have maybe that you recommend with clients? And then also, is there at a point where like you should be more concerned that it's a little bit more than just regular anxious holiday anxiety?
Thank you. That's a great question. So I think, and just like the other presenter said, I think I start with like setting expectations for myself and for my family. So I think one of the most important things I talk to people about is having those boundaries. So boundaries around your time, boundaries around maybe how much money you're going to spend. So kind of go into the holiday season in general with that thought in mind, and, kind of prep people, I'm not going to be spending the night here. I'm staying in the hotel. I know for some families, that's a big issue if you decide you don't want to stay like at home with everyone else or
Mhm.
things like that. So kind of starting with those expectations, and prepping people and prepping yourself to kind of be able to maintain those boundaries. I think that warning signs that the anxiety may need something higher than like your coping skills or even like mindfulness and those kind of things is if let's say if the anxiety is starting to impact your ability to sleep or to eat, to like take care of your kind of basic needs. I think that might be something that could warrant intervention. And I always think that anxiety presents in different ways. So, sometimes it's more up here, that busy mind and worried thoughts and preoccupation. And sometimes it's more physical. If you're having a panic attack, it's very uncomfortable, and people usually bring themselves to more medical attention if it's the first time they're having those. So, I think those are kind of like the warning signs that I would be watching out for. Are you getting to the point that either the anxiety up here or physical is starting to really impact your ability to take care of yourself and function in your daily life?
Yeah, that's great. Now, hosting for the holidays is also a whole different set of anxiety and grief. Especially I feel like as well for new mothers. And I know that postpartum is an area you especially work with, Sasha Nicole. Is there any tips or advice you have specifically for new moms who are going through the holidays, whether it be attending or especially like if they're hosting?
Yeah, I think, like, for example, what Dr. Dooley said in terms of those boundaries, a lot of times, new moms, they feel very overwhelmed already with the new baby. And then if they are going through postpartum depression, there's a multitude of feelings that they're going through. And depending on what type of postpartum that they're experiencing, if they're not feeling the connection or if they're too overly connected. So for example, you have those mothers who may not want anyone to touch the baby at all, doesn't want anyone to help them. And then you have those who may not feel connected in any way. So I do think that setting those boundaries, as Dr. Dooley mentioned, and being okay, as previously said, of not necessarily going or not necessarily hosting. I think that as mothers, we may take on more than what we actually have to. And so adding on that added stress is not always necessary. So some of those tips would just be being mindful of like where you are, like paying attention to how you feel and where you are and what you can and cannot actually do.
Yeah, those are some great ones. Alyssia, was there anything that we've missed so far as what you would tell clients for working through anxiety during the holidays?
No, I think you guys pretty much like everything you were saying. I was nodding like, yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
it sounded nuts. All right, I wanted to make
And
sure
the
that
boundaries.
boundaries are huge and they're hard, even for me as well, learning to say no and learning that boundaries, protect you and also the other person, because sometimes it messes up a situation if you're going outside of what you're capable or what you're able doing just to say yes. And now they're not getting what they need because you were trying to people please. So I've learned that boundaries protect both parties actually, even though it's hard to navigate through sometimes. Now, one of the other things that, we mentioned we would be discussing today is grief. Grief through the holidays is incredibly difficult. I know that you guys were mentioning that part of the anxiety of the holidays is that people expect you to be happy and people expect you to be filled with joy. But, how can you do that when you're dealing with the loss of someone that you love? Dr. Dooley, what are some tips that you give clients who are dealing with like their first holiday with the loss of a family member or friend?
Yeah, I definitely think lots of grief gets reactivated at this time of the year. And so when I talk to my patients, I always try to ask them to just hold space and self-compassion for themselves, especially what I call it that year of first, the first Christmas, the first birthday. And I think it's always particularly challenging. And just to be mindful about like, a lot of times grief and loss comes in layers. And so even if it isn't like someone just died, maybe, a lot of my patients who maybe have infertility struggles, it seems like it can get reactivated this time of the year because it might be so family focused or thinking about kids opening, presents on Christmas, like having that vision and it not being there. So, I think what I talk about is what are we really grieving? Sometimes it might seem like a person died, but the reaction and what might be happening could be like layers of grief and loss because it kind of can pile up like that. So for me, it's just being mindful of like what's really going on and, what is the loss or the grief really about? And I think just holding that self-compassion and understanding that when you lose somebody you love who's very close to you, life isn't going to be the same, and I think for me, I'm just honest with people. There's like before they passed and after they passed, and it can be something good. Now, after they pass, you can have a satisfying life. It can be a great life, but it won't be the same. And I think for me, it's just like acknowledging that with them.
Acknowledging is like the first step towards finding that healing is what you're saying. And also for anyone listening, if you have questions as well, you don't have to wait until we're not recording to ask. You're welcome to pop in, ask questions, make comments. You can also leave things in the chat if you would like me to ask any particular questions that you don't feel comfortable asking right away. Alyssia, what are some tips and tools that you work with your patients with?
I think I try to have people prepare a little bit and think about, the things that maybe the person that you're grieving used to do. So whether it was a tradition or, grandpa's no longer with us and he's the one that carved the turkey, right? Like to really plan ahead of time to think about those things, because I think in the moment, if you don't realize it until that roll is empty and you're all sitting around the table or whatever, then I think it's a little bit more shocking. So thinking about, maybe we need to bring in a new tradition, or do we, honor their memory and keep the tradition alive and maybe someone new can step into that role, or what that might look like. And just to figure it out, I think ahead of time, because especially if it might cause, like a family showdown where now, an uncle, a cousin, and a nephew are all trying to get in and be the ones to carve the turkey now because they want to fill that role. And so it's like sorting through those things so things can go a little bit more smoothly. And then also just having them really think about, what their limits are, like the boundaries with themselves, like how much can they handle? Some events they might just have to decline if it's too much. Yeah, and I think too, this time of year, try not to numb the grief, because I see an uptick in like substance use and alcohol. And I think that just makes things so much worse, especially with the alcohol, that makes us a little bit more depressed, So I think it's so much easier at functions to have a cup in hand all the time because it's festive, and usually that's a little bit more acceptable and going on with everybody. So, I think it's easier to overindulge in that way and, sometimes regret it later on.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't think of alcohol as being a depressant because it makes you like, woo, life of the party. But it really actually turns down your mood, not turns it up. Even though in the moment it might feel like it. Sasha Nicole, I know that earlier you mentioned, like sometimes you need to just stand up and say like, this is the time that I need to leave. And that can be hard for some people. And also though, not attending events due to mental health. Have you ever had experiences with that? And like, what tips do you have for, I guess, addressing it with family if you're not going to be there for those special occasions?
Yeah, I mean, I recently had my grandmother who was like a mother to me who had passed. And so for me, it's about like really being honest about, how I feel with others and then just sitting in those feelings. And I'm one of those people who I really believe in being forward in terms of how you're feeling. So I do think that when addressing that with family, like you have to be okay with sharing your truth and not being discouraged if someone doesn't agree with that. And that's, really my answer in terms of doing that and just being okay with like, if you decide not to attend, like I was watching a video recently of her dancing, my grandmother dancing. And so I just was kind of like, I feel, and I just allow those emotions. And I think sometimes people need to be okay with saying, this is my truth. This is how I feel. These are my emotions. And again, my favorite word, that being unapologetic about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think learning to sit in your truth is something that's hard for people, but that's really important. Like we so often want to just push ourselves out of whatever's making us feel bad, right? Like we don't like feeling bad. Who does? So that's where you do either like the substance, or people will just try to do, that toxic positivity. Like it's okay, it's fine, it's all good. But sometimes it's okay to like have a moment where you're just like, I feel bad. Like don't dwell in it, don't live in it, but have that moment, acknowledge that moment, and then try to sort of work through that.
Because as you also said, that moment is a release too, if you allow yourself to have it.
Yeah, I have emotional breakdown sometimes where I just cry it out. I just cry. And then I'm like, you know what? I feel good. I feel better. So yeah, sometimes having those moments definitely do help you. I was actually just about to ask Dr. J something, but she went away. In regards to just dealing with the holidays overall, because after Christmas and Thanksgiving come the New Year, I feel like that sort of brings on its own separate set of anxiety and guilt and grief, because there's all of that like new year, new me thing, which I personally kind of love. I feel invigorated, but that can also be stressful for some people too, feeling like because it's like you're getting it on both ends, right? So it's the end of the year and everyone's like, give it your all for the end of the year, do your best, like finish strong, go hard. And then they're also like, start strong, be your best, do all that you can do. And I feel like that gives a whole nother set of like holiday anxiety, because you're trying to not just deal with your family, but you're trying to deal with like how you're going to handle the wind down, all of the noise that's coming at you to finish strong, go hard, final quarter. Dr. Dooley, what are some tips you have for people who are dealing with it and feeling that pressure?
Yeah, I think that, no one really is under any pressure if you don't want to have a new year, new me to be doing that. So I think, first of all, just deciding if that's something that, do you feel like that's productive for you? Do you feel like that's helpful? Like some people, like you said, are very motivated by it. They're waiting for the new year. They love a fresh start. I think in the work that I do, and typically because I am seeing people who have more severe mental illness, for some people, just waking up every day is a struggle. And so the thought of a whole new year coming isn't very positive. It's like, oh, I got to start this whole thing over. So, I think I keep that in mind. I think if you're, there's a lot of strategies around like goals and habits. So, if I'm talking to people who are like, how to do it this year, I'm going to, do this. I really do encourage them to have, either SMART goals, make things that are attainable. There's a book called Atomic Habits, which really talks about making very small incremental changes and kind of really appreciating the process for change. So I think if people are feeling like anxiety about that, about going into the new year with a new year near me, you don't have to, there's no requirement to do that, to feel pressure if you don't want to, pick up the typical lose weight or, whatever. There's always like these exercise or do these things. Like no one has any obligation to do that if you don't want to, or you don't have to do any self-help things if you don't want to. But if you do, I, do try to kind of steer people from like short-term things, that, people tend to burn out on the first 30 days and towards, how can you learn and change through a process? Like the process of change is often what leads to a long-lasting change, not the end result. So I think that's what I encourage people to do if they are coming, and I know how that disappointment can be when it doesn't work out, like, January 21st. So I think just saying, hey, okay, if we're going to have a plan for change, what can we do to help you appreciate the process of change? So that's what I try to do.
Yeah, I've learned that over time that enjoying the journey is like the biggest part of getting to the destination. And I think a lot of times we're all like, oh, how can I get there? How can I meet this goal? But truly finding enjoyment in the little steps along the way is what makes getting to that goal easier, and it makes it feel a little bit more attainable. Sasha Nicole, I know you're an entrepreneur. Like, how do you deal with that end of the year hustle, bustle, pressure to finish strong and go hard?
I really think about what do I subscribe and believe right now. And so if I have a belief that I am trying to do something specific, I really focus on doing that consistently so that when the new year comes, I can be consistent as to what I'm working on. I do especially if you're talking about certain revenues, you can't help but look at like quarters, and then your last quarter, you do want to make sure that you're pulling in or doing certain things. But, that grace, like giving grace and allowing yourself to be prepared for whatever it is that you're working on is just, how I look at it, and just maintaining that consistency. So if it's not something that I'm already currently working on, I don't even think about what I'm going to do in the following year, like that I'm going to just pick up something new, because typically, you're not going to maintain it.
Yeah, that's the thing with resolutions, right? Is that it's hard to maintain them long term. People start them and stop them. Alyssia, what are some things that you maybe work with clients to help them feel encouraged but not overwhelmed with the changes through the holidays?
Yeah, I think I work with a lot of high achievers, people pleasers, perfectionists, right? And so a lot of times I think they are highly sensitive to that toxic positivity and that, trying to push through. So sometimes it's just kind of sitting with somebody and reminding them, you don't have to do this. This doesn't have to be one more thing on your to-do list. You're not obligated. And then I think sometimes that's when you see them exhale a little bit. They're like, oh, okay. Like, oh, okay, you gave me permission. I don't have to have this on my to-do list. I'm gonna give myself permission to. And so I think just kind of echoing some more of the same, giving themselves grace, and that just the space to not have to do it all, not be superhuman. And I think too, reminding them about like what media they're intaking,
Yeah.
So for example, like if I have clients who are really, sad to be single around the holidays, and they're not kissing anybody at midnight on New Year's, don't sit up and watch a whole bunch of rom-coms and, be sobbing because you haven't found your special someone. It's like, be mindful of that. Like, are you putting yourself through that on purpose to kind of have a cathartic cry? Or is it like you had a marathon and watched 12 Hallmark movies in a row?
Yeah. When Harry Met Sally is not for you in that case. Do not watch.
No, don't do it.
Yeah.
And then too, like muting those people on social media who maybe they are that, they're not attuned with what you want to see. So if you are in a mode where you're like, okay, I feel motivated, then, kind of follow some more of that. But if it's coming too hard at you and you feel pressured to start the New Year's checklist, then maybe mute those folks for a little while or unfollow them. It's all is fair on social media. Just hit the unfollow, hit the mute, and take care of yourself.
That I love that you brought up that point, because that is huge. And I'm always preaching that. Like, the one positive thing about social media is you literally create the world around you. The more you like certain things, the more you click on certain articles, the more of it you see. The less that you do, the less of it you'll see. And like you mentioned, you can mute people, you can unfollow people. And I've had people who, I think they're great, I love them, but their posts are either upsetting to me or triggering of me, and I'm just like, mute or unfollow. So we're still friends, but I only see you when like I actively step into the space to see you. And same thing with when people are, having things come up on their timeline, what you search for. It's interesting because sometimes people will say like, oh, I see this person all the time or this family all the time. It's like, well, if you're clicking on it every time you scroll across the article, you're literally telling the computer, I want to see more of it. So you're going to see more of it. And it's interesting because, kind of, that's a small version of like life, right? The more you think about things and the more you put things out there, the more that it's going to be attracted to, whether that's positive or negative. And I know that we've talked a lot, from the mental health aspect of it, but I do feel like there's a relationship between mental health and faith, and especially in our community, we tend to be very faith-based. And since we have Dr. J, I'm going to put her on the spot a little bit, if you don't mind, Dr. J, just from the faith aspect of dealing with, I would say, especially with grief through the holidays, are there any advice or tips of words that you give people to help them deal with that difficulty during the holiday period? Oh, you're muted. Oh no. Technology just won't let us be great. It froze. Okay. Well, do either of the three of you have any faith-based tips for dealing with it?
I mean, I think I'm definitely probably a more spiritual person than following any specific organized religion, but I definitely think that, you can incorporate, whatever practices you have to, just to really promote like peace of mind, body and soul. And so I'm a big proponent of being connected to whatever your faith-based system is. And if you can, to incorporate that, I think, if you, whether it's loved ones who passed away or ancestors or whatever it is that you do, I think it can be really comforting, particularly during times of grief, to kind of draw on those kind of experiences and the strength, from the, just from teachings and things like that. So I'm definitely a big proponent of bringing that in there. And, I think someone mentioned earlier about finding a new tradition. So, if you're a Christian, but maybe, maybe the nativity story doesn't resonate with you, I think kind of acknowledging the parts of things that do resonate with you and using that to kind of just help provide comfort. Because I think you're right. I think, there's a lot of, particularly mental health, is really focused, very cognitive, it's very intellectual, and focus on understanding. And I think sometimes we understand perfectly fine. We need comfort and soothing. So definitely don't leave that part out. You're practicing the things that are comforting.
Yeah, I think just chasing your peace is huge. It's been a big topic for me this year, and I find that that's really at the forefront of everything that I do. Like, is this giving me peace? If my peace is taken away, how can I bring it back? Like today, I had to go outside, get some sun, walk around because I was feeling very agitated. So I was like, I just need to just have a moment. And I think that it's okay, even if you're with family and friends and need that moment, like take that moment, get that space, do what you need to sort of protect yourself and your mental health and all that during this time. We're going to continue, having a conversation. We're probably going to stop the recording in just a moment, but before we do, did either of you have any last tips or suggestions, last words to give to those who may be viewing this at a later time on YouTube?
Just real quick, since I do spend the majority of my time ordering medication, prescribing medication, just, during the holidays, if you do take medication, please try to remember to take them as prescribed. When you're traveling, make a plan for how you're going to take the medication. If you get stuck in a place, if you have a layover or something that goes longer, try to kind of plan for that to be sure that you have enough. If you're traveling with like controlled substances, please keep those in the original bottles. Definitely had several situations where people get caught with something that's a control outside of the bottle, and it can lead to some trouble for you. And someone mentioned earlier about alcohol and, how it can numb pain. Definitely, there's lots of medications for mental health that doesn't go well with alcohol. So, I have people now, they're asking me, doc, is it okay if I have like 2 drinks, or how many drinks is okay? So I think if you're not sure if it's okay to consume alcohol with any medications you might be taking, double check with your doctor. People will tell me sometimes like, oh, I'm not going to take it tonight because I know I'm going to drink. That may or may not be a good idea. So always double check about those things, but don't forget the routine of your medication and safety around it at holidays.
Yes, that's a really great point, because we didn't touch a lot on medication, but yeah, it is good. I'm horrible about remembering that not all medication should be with alcohol, so I'll just turn up. But yes, I will try to keep that in mind and double check if it's compatible. Alyssia or Sasha Nicole?
I was also going to say, around grief, sometimes we want to put on a strong face and, like we show up to the family gathering and we think we have to hold it together for everyone else. But I really think opening up to our friends and family who maybe are experiencing the same grief, or we trust them to support us in our grief, is important too. That way we're not, the stereotypical suffering in silence. Just because we may think that we're holding it together, and the other person may think the same thing, like, oh, I was trying to be strong for you. Like, no, like we can reminisce on this, and it doesn't have to be, this big, heavy subject. It can be us, honoring and cherishing their memory and supporting each other in the process. So,
yeah, absolutely.
I would just say that, with the holidays coming up, take the time to think about the things that you enjoy and that you can utilize that are healthy for you. So, from our last conversation, I'm really big into holistic practices as well. And so, like, one of the things that I love to do, I love going to the movies by myself. It just makes me feel good. It brings me joy. I like the experience. So just think of the experiences and the things that you can do that you enjoy that are healthy for you. I love going to the acupuncturist, my chiropractor, and these are all part of my wellness routine to just help me in these moments of anxiety or anything that I may be going through during the time. So just some things that you could also look at to take the time for yourself and, treat yourself as well.
Treat yourself. I love that. I probably take that to heart too much sometimes, because I indulge in retail therapy, which is the worst during the holiday season. But, definitely what they said as far as finding your peace, acknowledging your feelings. And the holidays are not all glitter and wonderfulness. And it's okay if you don't feel like it is. Like, you are not the only one. If you feel a little, gloomy during the holidays, there are many people who feel it as well. So just acknowledge that, and speak to, like Alyssia was saying, speak to your family or friends sometimes, because they might be trying to keep a straight face for you, and you guys can talk about those things together. Well, definitely thank you so much for joining. We're going to have some links in the description for crisis, and you can always go to NAMI.com NAMIDelaware.com for some more information. Thank you.